What happens when you mock Jesus and his church? Throughout history, there have been people who, for various reasons, dared to despise and ridicule the one who millions consider the Son of God. But how did their stories end? In this video, I will tell you about 5 people who mocked Jesus and met a tragic end, leaving a lesson that serves as a warning to all of us. Some of these names may sound familiar, like the famous actress Marilyn Monroe or the Roman Emperor Titus. We will explore their lives and how their actions led to consequences that no one would want to face. This video is not only about stories from the past, but also about examples that invite us to reflect on respect and reverence toward the sacred. Through these accounts, you will discover that our actions can have much deeper repercussions than we imagine. Whether you are a Christian or not, what you will hear today might change the way you view reverence toward the divine. In 1966, John Lennon, a member of the famous band The Beatles, made a statement that shocked the world: "We're more popular than Jesus right now." These words not only sparked great controversy, but also marked a turning point in his life and career. In the 1960s, the Beatles were at the peak of their fame. Their music and style had captured millions of people around the world. But with fame came controversy. In an interview with a renowned journalist, Lennon commented that Christianity was declining and that the Beatles were more influential than Jesus. While this statement didn't cause much of a stir in the UK, in the United States, particularly in the southern regions where religion is very important, it provoked great outrage. The reactions were swift. In several cities in the United States, radio stations stopped playing the Beatles' music. In some cities, they even publicly burned their records and merchandise. The band received death threats, and security at their concerts had to be heightened. Lennon tried to clarify his comments, saying he didn't mean to compare himself to Jesus, but was pointing out the decline of Christianity in daily life. However, the damage had already been done. On December 8, 1980, Lennon was shot and killed outside his apartment at the Dakota Building in New York by Mark David Chapman, a disturbed fan who was obsessed with him. After committing the murder, Chapman stayed at the scene reading a book called The Catcher in the Rye until the police arrived and arrested him. This tragic event left the world in shock and deep sadness. The story of John Lennon and his controversial statement invites us to reflect on the power of words and the impact they can have on our lives and those around us. We live in an age where public statements can reach millions of people in a matter of seconds, amplified by the media and social networks. Lennon's words, spoken without much thought, had consequences that affected not only his career but also his personal life. At the end of this chapter, I invite you to reflect on your own words and actions. How do you use your influence and voice? Do you respect the beliefs and feelings of others, especially on such personal matters as faith? Lennon's story reminds us that, while we are free to express our opinions, we must do so with responsibility and consideration for others. Let's remember that our words have power, and it is our responsibility to use them to build, not destroy. May John Lennon's story serve as a reminder of the importance of humility and respect in all our interactions. Now I'll tell you the story of Marilyn Monroe, one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses, and her encounter with the famous evangelist Billy Graham, which had an unexpected impact on her life and her tragic end. Marilyn Monroe was an emblematic figure of the 1950s, known for her beauty and talent in cinema. However, behind all that fame and glamour, she led a life filled with inner conflicts, insecurities, and much emotional suffering. Her career skyrocketed quickly, making her a cultural symbol, but her personal life was marked by instability and loneliness. In 1962, during one of the most vulnerable moments of her life, Marilyn had a brief but significant interaction with evangelist Billy Graham. Graham, known for his passion in preaching the message of Christ, felt a deep need to talk to her about his faith. During their conversation, he spoke to her about the love of Jesus and the hope she could find in God. According to reports, Marilyn listened attentively, but at the end of the conversation she replied, "I don't need your Jesus, I'm perfectly fine as I am." That response, although short, says a lot about Marilyn's spiritual and emotional state at that time. Despite all her success, she seemed to be struggling with an inner emptiness that neither fame nor fortune could fill. Sadly, just a week after this encounter, on August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead at her home in California. The official cause of her death was a drug overdose, leaving the world in shock and her admirers filled with grief and many unanswered questions. The tragic death of Marilyn Monroe remains the subject of speculation and mystery. Some believe her death was simply an accident, while others think it may have been intentional. What is undeniable is that her life, full of ups and downs, leaves us with important lessons about the search for meaning and purpose. This episode in Marilyn's life invites us to reflect on the opportunities we have to accept or reject faith. Her rejection of Billy Graham's invitation can be interpreted in many ways, but what is clear is that we all face moments when we must decide whether to accept the grace and love offered to us. At the end of this chapter, I invite you to reflect on your own life and the opportunities you've had to accept a message of faith and hope. Have you ever rejected the opportunity to explore a deeper spiritual life? Are you trying to fill an inner void with things that can't bring you true peace? Marilyn Monroe's story reminds us of the importance of seeking and accepting the love and grace that God offers us through Jesus. Let's not let the opportunities to find purpose and meaning in faith slip away. Reflect on your life and think about how you can open your heart to a new spiritual dimension that brings you peace and hope, no matter the circumstances. Have you ever thought about the spiritual implications of the lyrics of the songs you listen to? Now I invite you to explore the life of Bon Scott, the charismatic lead singer of the rock band AC/DC, and how his life and music leave us with important lessons. In 1979, AC/DC released Highway to Hell, an album that would become a milestone in the history of rock. The main song, also titled Highway to Hell, had lyrics that celebrated a life of excess and disregard for consequences. Many of the phrases encouraged a carefree and rebellious attitude, something that reflected the behavior of the band and especially its lead singer, Bon Scott. Scott was known for his wild lifestyle. His charisma on stage and his unique voice made him a legend in the music world. But behind that image of excess was a man who struggled with his own demons and personal issues. On February 19, 1980, less than a year after the release of Highway to Hell, Bon Scott was found dead in a car in London. The cause of death was asphyxiation due to vomiting, a result of alcohol intoxication. He was only 33 years old at the time. His untimely death devastated his fans and raised many questions about the life he had led and the decisions he had made. The lyrics of Highway to Hell glorified a life of indulgence without thinking about the spiritual or physical consequences. It is a sad irony that Scott, who sang about a road to hell, ended up meeting such a tragic end. This story invites us to reflect on how our words and actions can have a deep impact on our lives and those around us. The 1970s were a time of cultural change and revolution. Rock music became a form of expression for young people who wanted to challenge the norms and find their identity. In this context, figures like Bon Scott emerged as icons of freedom and rebellion. However, his life and death also remind us that seeking freedom without limits can have destructive consequences. When we think about Bon Scott's life, we should consider how our own decisions and lifestyles can affect our spiritual and physical well-being. Songs like Highway to Hell may seem harmless or simply entertainment, but they can also reflect and reinforce attitudes and behaviors that are not healthy for our spiritual and emotional life. I invite you to reflect on the influences in your life and how they affect you. Are you allowing negative messages to shape your decisions and attitudes? Are there areas in your life where you are ignoring the possible consequences of your actions? Bon Scott's life reminds us that while we seek freedom and fun, we must also think about the long-term consequences of our decisions. This story serves as a warning about the dangers of a life without limits and an invitation to seek balance, allowing us to enjoy life without compromising our health and spiritual well-being. What happens when someone dedicates their life to openly challenging religion and faith? I invite you to discover the answer by exploring the life of Christopher Hitchens, a well-known journalist and literary critic who became famous for his strong atheism and his critiques of religion. Christopher Hitchens was born in 1949 in England and became one of the leading figures of what is known as the New Atheism movement. He wrote numerous books and articles criticizing religion, one of the most famous being God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. In his works, Hitchens didn't just mock religion, he also argued that faith was deeply harmful to humanity. Hitchens was a natural polemicist, and his debates with religious figures and other intellectuals attracted large audiences. His sharp style and his ability to argue made him both admirers and detractors. His contempt for religion, especially Christianity, was evident in his writings and speeches. He described Jesus as a mythological figure and enthusiastically attacked Christian teachings. In 2010, Hitchens was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. Despite his illness, he continued writing and participating in debates, maintaining his atheist stance until the end of his life. He passed away in 2011 at the age of 62, leaving behind a controversial but influential legacy. The life and death of Christopher Hitchens invite us to reflect on the impact of our beliefs and how we express them. He lived in an era when secularism and skepticism were on the rise, especially in the Western world. His critiques of religion resonated with many people who shared his views, but they also provoked a strong rejection from those who saw his work as an attack on something sacred and essential to their lives. It's interesting that while Hitchens mocked religion, he never avoided debate and dialogue with people of faith. This contrast between his passionate rejection and his willingness to engage in open discussion with believers is a fascinating aspect of his character. Throughout his life, Hitchens was consistent in his beliefs, making him a complex and polarizing figure. When thinking about Christopher Hitchens' life, we should consider the importance of respect and tolerance in our conversations about faith and beliefs. We live in a diverse world where different opinions and beliefs coexist. Hitchens' story reminds us that while it's important to defend our convictions, we must do so with a spirit of respect and understanding. I invite you to reflect on how you approach conversations about faith in your own life. Are you respectful and open to dialogue, even when you disagree? How can you defend your beliefs in a way that promotes understanding and peace? Christopher Hitchens' life teaches us that while we may have strong convictions, the way we express them is just as important. This story is a call to reflect on our own attitudes toward faith and interfaith dialogue. In a world increasingly divided by differences in beliefs, we need to find ways to coexist and respect one another. How can power and arrogance lead a person to devastating consequences? Finally, we will explore the life of Roman Emperor Titus, who played a key role in the destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple in 70 AD, and how his legacy is marked by violence and tragedy. Titus Flavius Vespasian was born in 39 AD and distinguished himself as a great general under the reign of his father Vespasian. In 70 AD, Titus led the Roman legions in the war against the Jews, a brutal conflict that culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem. This war was one of the most traumatic events in Jewish history, leading to the destruction of the Second Temple, which was the center of Jewish religious life. The siege of Jerusalem was a brutal campaign. Titus and his troops surrounded the city for months, causing a terrible famine and unimaginable suffering for its inhabitants. Eventually, the Romans broke through the city's defenses, and the temple was brutally burned and destroyed. Historians of the time, such as Flavius Josephus, describe scenes of massacre and desolation, where hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed or enslaved. Interestingly, Titus initially tried to save the temple, admiring its magnificence and wanting to turn it into a trophy of Roman power. However, amid the chaos of battle, his orders were ignored, and the temple was reduced to rubble. This destruction had a profound impact not only on Judaism but also on Christianity, which saw this event as the fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy about the temple's destruction, as written in Matthew 24 verse 2. Despite his victory, Titus' life was not free of tragedy. After becoming emperor in 79 AD, Titus had a relatively short reign and faced several disasters, including the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which destroyed the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Titus died in 81 AD, just 2 years after taking the throne, without leaving any heirs, bringing an abrupt end to his dynasty. Titus' legacy is a mixture of power, conquest, and tragedy. The destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple is one of the most remembered and mourned events in Jewish and Christian history. Titus, who had mocked the beliefs and resistance of the Jews, left behind a legacy marked by violence and desolation. We must reflect on how our actions and decisions can have lasting consequences, both for ourselves and others. Arrogance and disdain for the beliefs and lives of others can lead to devastating outcomes, as we saw in the destruction of Jerusalem. I invite you to reflect on your life and your decisions. Are there areas where you are acting with arrogance or disregard for others? How can you make decisions that promote peace and respect instead of destruction and conflict? Titus' story reminds us that power and conquest do not define a positive legacy, but the ability to act with justice and compassion does. Have you ever wondered if there are spiritual consequences to mocking Jesus? In this video, we have explored the lives of some famous people who openly challenged the figure of Jesus and met tragic, premature deaths. Through these stories, we can learn important lessons for our spiritual life and personal growth. The first reflection is on the power of our words. The statements made by people like John Lennon, Marilyn Monroe, and Bon Scott not only showed a lack of respect for the sacred, but they also had a profound impact on their lives. In Matthew 12 verses 36 to 37, Jesus says, "But I tell you that everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." This warning reminds us that our words have power, and we must use them with wisdom and respect. The second reflection is on the importance of humility and respect for the sacred. Christopher Hitchens, known for his contempt for religion, died after an intense battle with cancer. His life and work teach us that while it is valid to question and debate, doing so with arrogance and disdain can lead us down a path of loneliness and conflict. Proverbs 3 verse 34 says, "He mocks proud mockers but shows favor to the humble." Humility opens us to grace and understanding, while arrogance can close us off from truth and compassion. The third reflection is on the consequences of our actions. The destruction of Jerusalem, led by Titus, and his premature death show us how disdain and violence toward the sacred and toward others can have devastating repercussions. In Galatians 6 verse 7, we read, "Do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." This teaching invites us to reflect on our actions and consider how we can live in a way that promotes peace and respect. If you want to delve deeper into these themes, I recommend studying the following biblical passages: Matthew 12 verses 36 to 37, Proverbs 3 verse 34, Galatians 6 verse 7, and the entire book of Proverbs, which offers rich wisdom about the power of words, humility, and the consequences of our actions. These passages guide us to live a life of respect, compassion, and wisdom, reflecting the character of Jesus in everything we do. In conclusion, the stories of these famous people serve as powerful reminders of spiritual truths. They teach us to be mindful of the power of our words, to live with humility, and to consider the consequences of our actions. May these lessons inspire us to live with integrity and respect, honoring the sacred in our lives and in the lives of others. Now I invite you to click on the screen to watch the recommended video about what God thinks about divorce. We will explore 5 uncomfortable truths that reveal God's heart on this delicate subject. Join us on this journey through the Bible to better understand God's design for marriage, Jesus' teachings, and the lessons that can transform your life and relationships. Don't miss it. Click and discover these powerful truths.